abuse. And if you know the Institute for Justice, they've done some excellent work that resulted in some of the toughest eminent domain legislation in Georgia. So we thank you for that. Before working with the Institute for Justice, Dr. Carpenter was a school and principal. He's a public policy analyst and a faculty member at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, where he's currently a professor. He has a PhD from the University of Colorado, and despite what you might think, he does have some spare time in his life, and he tells me that he is a classically trained musician, percussionist, and a pilot, and he promises that he doesn't do them at the same time. So we'd like to welcome Dr. Carpenter. Thank you.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning to talk about our book, and Chip sends his regards as well. He is in retirement now in Utah, so that would have been quite a trip for him to come, and so if you know Chip, we do send his regards. This morning, I want to begin by introducing you to somebody from our book, and that is Kim Powers Bridges. Kim owns and operates Bridges Funeral Home in Tennessee, but she's not from Tennessee. Kim is actually from Oklahoma. She started her first business there, a funeral business, but she had to leave Oklahoma when she ran afoul of the law. It turns out that Kim was engaged in the very dangerous practice of selling caskets without a funeral director's license. Before that, in the early 1980s, Kim was on the executive fast track. She grew up in a family of hardworking entrepreneurs. She learned the relationship between hard work and success, and after she left college, she enjoyed a lot of success in a number of different businesses. And eventually, she ended up at one of the nation's largest funeral companies. And there, she sold pre-need funeral services. She saw this as a way to combine her drive in business with her desire to help people through her work. And as before, she was very successful in that business. But after a few years, she began to notice that there was a need, a niche to be filled, a classic entrepreneur. And that was, she saw that in the funeral industry, the merchandise that was sold was marked up a significant amount. Caskets, for instance, would be marked up anywhere from 250 to 600%. So she began to think, how could I put together a business model that would enable me to sell the same merchandise, but at a much lower cost? So she eventually left this funeral business. She joined up with Dennis Bridges, who had left the same company, and they spent a year forming what became Memorial Concepts Online. And as the name implies, their business plan was to sell everything, all of their merchandise, particularly caskets, over the internet. And they would take advantage of drop shipping from manufacturers so they wouldn't have any inventory on hand. That enabled them to keep their costs very low, and then they passed on those savings to the consumers. And they thought they had a winning business plan, and they did. But they ran into a problem. And the problem was Oklahoma state law says that if you want to sell a casket to consumers in Oklahoma, and you're an Oklahoma-based company, you must be licensed as a funeral director. And Kim was not. Now, she could have gone back to earn this license, but it would require her to go to school for 2 years. She would have to complete an internship, during which time she would embalm 25 bodies. Then she would have to have a brick-and-mortar business in which she would have a selection room, a preparation room, a viewing room, and she would have to have hand, none of which they were interested in. As if it were not irrational enough to require a funeral director's license to sell a box, because that's what a casket is. It's an empty box. The law also created a circumstance where an Oklahoma-based company had to be a licensed funeral director to sell to consumers in Oklahoma. But companies outside of the state who sold to consumers in Oklahoma did not have to have a funeral director's license. So Kim could have taken her business, which was essentially computer servers. She could have taken her servers and moved across the state line to Kansas. And there, she could have sold caskets to consumers in Oklahoma all day long. But she didn't want to do that. She wanted to stay in Oklahoma. She wanted to raise her family in her hometown of Ponca City. And she thought the law was wrong. And not only wrong, but injurious, because it enabled funeral directors to mark up their merchandise and take advantage of people who were at a difficult or vulnerable time in their lives. So she stayed in Oklahoma and she fought the law. Well, she wasn't the only one who thought this law was wrong. Some legislators did so as well. So beginning in 1999, they began introducing a series of bills every year to remove the licensing requirement for casket sales. Kim testified on behalf of several of these bills. And every year, they lost. They lost for one reason, and one reason alone. And that was the licensed funeral directors, the industry, would go to the legislature and they would lobby aggressively to protect their license. And every year, they succeeded. So today, in Oklahoma, if you want to sell a casket, and you are an Oklahoma-based company, you must have a funeral director's license. What Kim and the legislators ran into is what we call in our book the bottleneckers. A bottlenecker is somebody who advocates for the creation or perpetuation of a government regulation, particularly an occupational license, to restrict the free flow of workers into an occupation in order to enjoy an economic benefit as a result. The bottleneckers are evident throughout the economy. We know that our doctors and our attorneys have licenses. And we generally know that our barber has a license or our cosmetologist has a license. But recent research that we published indicates the occupations that now require a license might surprise you. So if you want to be an auctioneer, for instance, you have to be licensed. Or if you want to be a sign language interpreter, or a locksmith, or a florist in Louisiana, or a crane operator, or a funeral attendant. The list goes on of occupations that for years were never licensed but now are because of the work of bottleneckers. For 25 years, we at the Institute for Justice have fought to reform occupational licensing. We've represented individuals who want nothing more than to exercise their right to earn an honest living. IJ is a law firm, as you heard Benita describe. And we've represented people for the past 25, 26 years. Our very first case was on the issue of occupational licensing and economic liberty. And we have continued to litigate on behalf of these individuals throughout this time. And what we've discovered in all of this is that there is a myth about occupational licensing. And the myth is this: licenses are created at the request of harmed consumers and citizens. But the truth is, legislators create licenses at the request of those in the industry to be licensed. At first blush, it seems absurd. Why would anyone ask for more government intrusion into their business? But the answer to the question, like so many questions, is to follow the money. Those in the industry come to recognize that a license creates a bottleneck. It excludes competitors. It enables them to artificially inflate prices and wages as a result for their own benefit. But the push for licensure is more than just about economic advantage. When you hear bottleneckers ask for a license, their language will often be something like, we also need this license to confer to us a certain amount of status, recognition. We want to be licensed because we want to be like those other occupations or professions that are already licensed. A certain recognition that comes only with licensure. So as a result, when a reform bill is introduced in the legislature, or when a license is challenged in court, the bottleneckers will mount a ferocious campaign in order to protect their license. And the funeral industry is just one example. In 25 years, we have yet to find a single example of a license that is created by any means or protected by any means other than the bottleneckers. But yet, this myth persists. these licenses exist for